Here we are. Is that right now,
Yes.
Jane? Well, my little assistant here that's very well known in all jewelry talks, I
Mhm.
think she wants to retire now. She said hello. That's her usual procedure. She knows it. Now, I'll be talking, I don't usually talk about myself, and I really had to go down memory lane because I didn't realize myself how things started. Or I knew, but I never sort of thought about it. You may wonder why I start with Cuba. Well, jewelry, my knowledge and to do with jewelry really started in Cuba, where I was born. My father was a refugee in Cuba, and to earn money, he learnt from a French refugee because during the war it was very difficult to find diamond cutting places in Europe. So he learned how to cut diamonds, and here's my father in front of the machines working on diamonds. And after the war, my mother was an SOE during the war and came to Cuba, married him in 1947. I was born, and here I am. They started a jewelry business for gemstones, import-export of gemstones. Jewelry was highly important in countries like Cuba, more important than the settees in the house. And here I am, about 3.5 years old, sorting out stones and measuring them. So that's how it all began. And then after the Cuban Revolution, we went to New York, and my father opened a business, Chadour Charms Inc. And he designed jewelry. Charms were very fashionable in the early 60s, late 50s. And it was on 47th Street. I couldn't find an old image, but 47th Street in New York is called the Gold, or was called the Gold and Diamond Alley. And I, as a child, spent my holidays because my mother was working, my father was in the 47th Street, and I just had to follow. And he used to design these charms, had them cast, and he set the stones. And I was working on a book and suddenly realized, looking at an auction, Vivian Lee, this actress, actually had a charm that my father made on her charm bracelet. So that was a bit of a surprise. Here it is, there's a mine, and that was hers. So 47th Street, yeah, we had friends that had refineries, tools for goldsmiths, specialized in corals and pearls, the odd visit to Asael Pearls and Harry Winston, because my father had friends who worked there. So that's how really I got rather involved in jewelry. Then we moved in 1962 to Frankfurt am Main in Germany. My father spoke German because he was, as a refugee in Germany, could speak fluent German, and he was asked to run a pearls company. So that's how I got involved in pearls, which you'll find out later also played a part in my life. I was at school at the time, but I've never had proper toys. My toys were always in the office. I'm not saying that in any sadness or anything, but that was child labor. So I was stringing pearls. I was making pairs of pearls. Pearls are not all white. They have so many color hues. So I was involved in writing invoices, making tea and coffee, packing parcels, pearls, pearls, pearls. So then let's go fast. And at the age of 18, I said, I don't want to have anything to do with jewelry ever again. I'd finished, I wanted to study chemistry and so on. I wanted to become an artist, but my parents wouldn't allow me to become an artist because they said you can't earn a living with that. So that was it. So the next best was art history. And fast forward, I did my PhD in Germany at the University of Münster, and I worked on an Italian goldsmith uh, in, in who worked for St. Peter's and made this incredible cross and candlesticks for the Vatican. And so I worked in the Vatican, and just to talk about women, this was in the 70s, late 70s. Women were not very, just about allowed to enter the Vatican and work in the archives there. That was, and there were signs, you had to write a letter to the Pope and ask for permission, and you also were everywhere there were signs up that women have to be dressed properly. So just a little bit of women's story. But this was a fantastic jeweler who worked for the Medici, the Farneses, incredible goldsmith of the late 16th, early 17th century. And I could tell you lots more stories on that. But let's move on to where I really realized that my initial as a jewelry historian started because 18, I didn't want anything to do with jewelry trade ever again. And because of my background and my thesis, I was then asked, I had a scholarship to work on a historical collection of jewelry of 910 pieces. And this museum, the Museum of Decorative Arts, is one of the museums that in the late 80, in that period of time when I was there, it was never built up after the war. It only moved into a proper building in 1989. By then, I'd already moved on. And this window here, you see here, that is where I sat, and I had a view on Cologne Cathedral. And I was sitting at a desk of the 1950s with a chair of the 18th century. So that was my workplace. And it was the red light neighborhood in those days. So the jewelry was down there in a room where you could see easily what I was doing, not very secure. I mean, the building was secure, but I didn't feel secure. So there you go, red light neighborhood, working on jewelry. But when I was working on this talk, I realized that my first experiences of displaying jewelry were when I finished the book, and this is the building where the jewelry was then shown in an exhibition. So that was my first experiences with curating a jewelry exhibition. These are the 2-volume catalogs that I wrote with 910 pieces. And recently, the museum has now a proper jewelry gallery since December 2024, and a new book was published. And I was greatly honored after 40 years to be asked to write an introduction. That meant an awful lot to me, to be reunited with something I'd done 40 years ago. But you can't talk about curating without showing a few little odd bits of jewelry. Otherwise, it becomes very, very ridiculous. So here we have a Roman necklace. It covered 7,000 years of jewelry. So I really had to knuckle down and learn from the very beginnings. Medieval jewelry was better, ancient jewelry, medieval jewelry was better documented than anything else. Now there's so many books, but when I was working on this collection, there weren't very many books. So here you have a Roman necklace, a medieval belt of the 15th century, made of gold and sapphires and rubies. Children's amulet corals were always a children's amulet against illnesses of the blood. And then a fantastic Renaissance 1570s, a very rare survival of a Renaissance pendant, which you find all these things on portraits. Now, this piece I pulled out because I remember I was working on this little piece and it was rattling, and I couldn't understand why was it rattling. And then very carefully, I managed to get these scissors out. Nobody knew about that. And then I rushed to the director. I said, look what I found. I was quite excited about that. It was it was a little sewing set. And then you have 910 pieces. I can only show you a few. But Art Nouveau, beautiful enamel work, very famous Art Deco period. And this is a Cologne jeweler who revived granulation, and in the 60s was very avant-garde for her time. So then we move on. I was an academic in Cologne. I didn't know I was working in my little corner at the window, doing all my work and writing the book. I had an old-fashioned camera with gloves because it was so painful. There were no electronic things in those days. It was a huge typewriter, very, very thing. That's what the museum gave me to work on. And then came to Hanau, Germany, which is a very famous, or was famous until the First World War, as a really jewelry city. And I became the managing director of the Goldsmith Society. And here I am. I had to organize every year at least one competition for jewelers from all over the world. Hundreds of pieces were sent in. And this is the jury that was for this one. And this is the building where I was under the roof, my office. And this I found on the internet, but that's what the showcases looked like. I had to do all the exhibitions. We had somebody who helped with the mounting, but I had to know where to put what. And with these competitions, I had psychological phone calls the following day. Oh, did I win the first prize? And of course, the ones who called were the ones who were thrown out in the first session. And of course, you had complaints because the worst pieces were usually at the back of the room, the best ones at the front. So that is what you call a lot of complexities of curating. So I was plunged into a very public role with press work and radio, television, and all sorts of things. And that is also where I became a soroptimist in Hanau. Because of my knowledge in goldsmith, they wanted me as a founding member. That's how it started. So by 1988, I decided to become self-employed, and I worked for all kinds of groups. Now, I pulled this out just for I thought, should I or shouldn't I? This was a traveling exhibition for a group of jewelers, high-end jewelers, and they had a steel construction where it was like going into an Egyptian tomb, and people had to stand in a queue to get in. We had 9 showcases with about 20 odd pieces of jewelry, telling the story of jewelry of the 20th century, which is difficult enough. When I was advising them, we did the book. I said, it's the photographer or me, but the two of us can't work together. He just made I said, you've got beautiful pieces of jewelry. You don't need his artwork. So they agreed of that in the book. We had very nice pictures inside the book. Without telling me behind my back, they used one of his awful photographs on the cover. And 2 days before it was about to open in the first, because this exhibition moved to about 7 cities in museums, and 2 people withdrew their pieces because they said, we don't want anything to do with this. So as a curator, you suddenly have to come up with some sort of solution and find new pieces. You can understand they were very angry. Look at that with all that flashing lights. You don't see the beauty of the jewelry. So sometimes they don't listen, and behind their back they did things, but they learned their lesson. They had to do a whole complete new poster as well. So there you go. But then I also was asked to, by sheer coincidence, I was asked to work on Spanish shipwreck. This is gold that was found that came from the Philippines. It was on its way to Mexico. The routes were usually from the Philippines. The Spaniards it was a colony of the Spaniards. Jewelry was made on the Philippines, and it was then transported to Mexico, Cuba, and then to Seville in Spain, and then traded in Europe. When I signed the contract, I thought, oh, it looks okay, until I realized what I got myself into, because I had to learn all about Siamese jewelry, about Javanese jewelry, Chinese filigree, because these chains were made by Chinese craftsmen. This is Javanese, this is European. So this was quite a task, but it's just through a colleague in New York that I'd helped a few years before with some Portuguese earrings. She thought I was a specialist on Spanish jewelry and suggested I work because she didn't have the time. And then the function of a curator is not only about exhibitions. This jewelry was then taken to Singapore to be cleaned and restored. And I wasn't there all of the time, but I certainly saved it from a lot of problems. When I got there, I said, oh, this is fantastic. Now, just look at this, what this looks like. I said, please be very, very careful because there is enamel underneath, and enamel surviving in 350 years underwater is very rare. And this is what came out afterwards. Not only that, a very famous auction house was there the day before I arrived. Thank goodness we didn't meet. And they wanted to take the whole treasure, break it up and make it into usable jewelry. And I nearly exploded. And I said, I won't be cataloging this collection unless you stop that because it's ridiculous. So the whole treasure is now in Saipan on the Mariana Islands, where it in 1638 had been wrecked. And then because of my work on this shipwreck, I was asked to work on another shipwreck, but for an antiques, art and antiques fair in Hanover in 1993. So I said, well, we could choose the Etosha and the Santa Margarita, which is in Key West, Florida. So a colleague from the fair, we traveled to Key West and collaborated with the museum. We didn't get all the special pieces, but we got quite a lot. And then we had this huge room to fill. We had showcases, and the director from Key West and I were using sandbags and throwing it into the showcases. And then we displayed things just as if they'd come out of underwater. They were all skew with, nothing straight. And then there was a whole divers, a big tank, huge tank, with divers and shells inside to give you the feel what it was like underwater. And the funniest thing of all was they had a music composition. So anybody watching looking at this display was listening to music of water waves, which of course had other effects, but I won't go into that. Oops, what is that? Interesting is the shipwreck because you just see these silver bars. They weigh 30 to 40 kilos. And they came, of course, from Colombia, the gold, and Peru. And these are taxation marks. And these are gold bars, but these things weigh 30 to 40 kilos. This was a very important salt cellar. That was a very important thing in the time. Salt was a very expensive. Uh, we think of it as something cheap, but it wasn't at the time. It's at the salt was an expression. And they actually knew which ship it was only by the tax marks because they were registered in Seville. So let's move on. In 1995, those who know, I moved to Harpenden with my husband Raymond, who some of you knew him. And I was asked to the V&A to work on the silver galleries, Spanish and Portuguese silver. Somehow everybody thought I had something to do with Spanish and Portuguese. I don't know why. But it was continental silver, and I worked there, and there are showcases that are still there, which I had worked on. But the major project was the William and Judith Bollinger Gallery. This was a huge task. Here you see what it looked before. The old gallery had been taken out, everything, and this is what it became. And this was a huge task. We had 4,000 pieces of jewelry and also boxes and watches. And I was employed 1 year before they had the architect or the sponsor. And this was unusual. That was very unusual. So I was asked to lay out a plan how you can display 4,000 pieces of jewelry without knowing the architect, without knowing what the displays would look like, and so on. So anyways, I started, and in the end, it sort of worked out, and I had all kinds of things to do. But I'll go through this in a minute, how this is the gallery, for those who don't know it. We have here on the side a display cradle to grave, explaining the jewelry, because we had the education department. I had to work with the education department, and they were tough and very difficult at the time, not now maybe. But I always had the task to get on with them, and I somehow got on with them. It was quite something. And so we had cradle to grave explaining why do you wear jewelry. And then what you see here is a chronology. It starts with Greek, Roman, Etruscan, and then it goes medieval up to the end. We'll come back to this in a minute. In the end, there are 3,500 jewels now in there. And then it goes on 19th century and 20th century and contemporary here. This is a new display case that wasn't at the time when I was working there. They added the coronet that belonged to Queen Victoria, so that was a special display case. So you see these boards, and I'll tell you how I did it with these boards. I had, from the old display, I had black and white photographs of the old gallery, and the jewelry was, the size of a fingernail, probably more like the small fingernail. And I was a dab-handed cutting out 4,000 pictures. And I had A3 sheets of white paper, very high tech, as you can see. And the only thing the museum didn't supply me with was double-sided tape. So I bought that and just played around A3 sheets of white paper and how do you distribute the jewelry throughout the gallery. For me, it was also very, very important that each board This is one board, there's another board here. So each board should tell a story, because for me it's so important that a visitor doesn't have to do guesswork. The visitor understands. We had 150 words, which I had to battle because for every word, you have to say, oh, I need that 150 words, and then the labels. Because you want to tell the story. What's on the board and what does it mean? And then here, this is the contemporary part, 20th century. So here you have the full gallery, the view of the gallery. Then the mezzanine level that my colleague worked on the watches and boxes. I worked on traditional jewelry on the mezzanine. But with the education department, we also had to develop the screens here. One of them sounds quite easy, but that was maybe one of the most difficult ones, is to create something that visitors can make their own ring. And they can send it by email their design, and then they can do whatever they want with it. But to conceive that with IT people, and I'm not a technical person, I could only say, we need that, we need this or that to make a ring. So that was one of the computer stories. And the other one was 35 pieces that you look at in depth. So these were tasks. We also have, which I don't have the image there, we had some wonderful goldsmith tools so we could explain how a piece of jewelry is made from the design, the drawing, to the model, to the final piece, and how costs are calculated. And some of the tools exist since hundreds of years, which is interesting. Not today. Today you've got laser welding and 3D printing and whatever. Now you may wonder, these showcases in the center. Well, the idea is that you have visitors who spend a long time in the gallery or have the possibility, but you also have to think of visitors who have maybe 10 minutes on a tour through the museum and want to see some jewelry. So the idea of these cases was that for the visitor who doesn't have much time, they can walk through the middle of the gallery and see the major pieces in the center in these curved showcases. And it was very funny how we chose the pieces. Each board that I conceived was then checked with the curatorial team if they were happy with the combination. And then the right hand of the architect, we played around with the originals on these A3 sheets of white paper and then sorted that out. If it was okay, then it was photographed so we knew how it would be pinned on the board. Now, these mounts here, you see, it all looks as if it's floating in the air. Well, there's a funny story there because we had in the storage room, I had Post-it notes and I got my colleagues who were tall and less tall like myself, put Post-it notes to see at what height, what is the eye height, because you want the visitor to have a very good vision of the pieces and you don't want it bending around. We did also have to think of wheelchair visitors as well, especially when you do exhibitions. So these are very important. They go chronologically and correspond to the pieces on the walls. So you start with antiquity, medieval, and so on. But what is good curating without and then with this was the spiral with gemstones, a very rare collection of gemstones from the 19th century before they started treating the stones. And so the right hand of the architect, they always tried to keep us away on these big meetings because they knew we were trouble. And and we said, why don't we do a spiral of the gemstones? It's exciting. And no, I can't do that. And we managed to convince them to do the spiral. And so I had a big sheet of cardboard, and I had a gemologist helping me because there's a system to here. You have the hardest stones in the middle, the diamonds, and then you've got the rubies, sapphires, and so on. So it's the hardness of the stone that counts, and it ends with a pearl, which is not, strictly speaking, a gemstone. And so it's one of the biggest successes of the gallery. Everybody loves it. So I'm glad we pushed that through. Sometimes you have to push things through. Not always easy. And these are the boards, and they're also body orientated as far as you can, because I felt it's important. If you've got a necklace, you want earrings on top. Sometimes the earrings had to go in the center. The bracelet you wear on the arm, that's on the neck and that's on the ear. So where we could, we tried to put it sort of body orientated. Like here, it's a brooch, and the earrings on the side that belong to it. Just a few special pieces. Can't curate without showing a few pieces. This is a little traveling. It's only a few centimeters high, and it's a traveling altar that you say your prayers with. And you open it up, and along the side you have the prayer is engraved along here. And this would have been worn on a belt or in a pouch hung on a belt, and would have been somebody very, very wealthy owning such thing. Then the very famous Heneage jewel of Queen Elizabeth. You could talk a whole hour about her and her jewels. And was given to the Privy Councillor Sir Thomas Heneage in probably, well, dates are a little bit unclear, but by tradition it was given to him. And here she is, the official queen, and on his chest when he wore it, oh, look at that young, beautiful woman there. I won't go into any more. Then another superb discovery made actually while we are doing the curating the gallery. These 46 ornaments, we only knew they were Russian, possibly Louis Duval, we didn't know. And we were very fortunate at the time that the Diamond State Fund wanted these pieces for an exhibition, a few of them, for an exhibition in Moscow. And we found out exactly what it was. These had been pulled out of a jewel set that belonged to Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia. And here you see the same things. And these are being pulled apart. And in the State Fund, they still have parts of this set. And they were combined with garnets and 339 carats of diamonds for the whole set, because we didn't understand what these hoops were. But that, of course, all became clear. And then the very famous piece is Stéphanie de Beauharnais was the adopted daughter of Emperor Napoleon and Josephine, and this is emerald necklace. Very lucky to have that in the gallery, and you could tell a whole love story. Napoleon married off his family in all parts of Europe, and it wasn't always love. It was big jewels, though. Now, the other project that I worked on a few years later in 2012 we started, was the Pearls exhibition, and the Soroptimists came to see this exhibition. I remember the trip we did. And this is the poster, part of the poster and the book cover. And just that you know what a curator has, we had big meetings. I mean, I didn't even know the V&A had so many departments. It was PR, merchandising, health and safety, and whatever. It was unbelievable, these meetings. I've never experienced that. So you wonder, one of the things, why do you show on a poster? And it's to do with Qatar Museums Authority, which, the natural pearls. But these are cheap freshwater pearls, and we had them splashed over everywhere. The reason being, if we'd had a plain pearl necklace, nobody would have looked at the poster, or nobody would have looked at the cover of the book. But this creates curiosity, and this is one of the things you learn as you go along. But now to come to the actual exhibition, I traveled with the V&A to Kobe in Japan to see it because it was at the time on view in Kobe. And I was asked by the V&A to work on the exhibition that came basically from Qatar, but transform it into something for the V&A. And it certainly needed transforming. We couldn't take it like it was in Kobe. We took large parts of it. So here we have, and usually you have a 2-year running period for organizing such exhibitions. I never had the luxury in my life. I had only 1 year, plus writing the book. So anyways, just to cut the long story short, we had the first room with natural history of pearls, showing the pearls are not all white, and they're also created by sand or trapped fish or something. It's not Tears of the Gods or the old stories of that. It was very often just awful muck in the sea that got into the oyster and the pearl was made. But we didn't say that to the press. We did it a bit more refined. We then had an area all about the pearl fishing in the Gulf, extremely dangerous for the divers. And we showed the very basics that they had, the net, the stone that pulls them down. and the nose clip to keep the water out of the nose. And there they were in salt water from May till September. And their puller here was, their life depended on the puller. They'd let go and they'd have to pull them up when there was a sign to pull them up. Then, of course, we had a glorious pearls from the Gulf, beautiful section. And there we went to all kinds of shops and places to get these busts because we didn't want to have busts that looked a bit too over the top. We had to be careful also with the Qatari and that it didn't look too feminine. So all kinds of weird decisions that you had to make. But these are fantastic pearls that we had. You have thousands of oysters to get pearls like that. Then came the co-curator from Qatar. He was French. He was quite late. He's died 2 years ago. But he was quite a character. He hated museums, hated curators, hated everything, but he loved pearls. But there you had to live with that. But he had wonderful ideas. And in France, he had the exhibition, and these old safes became, because the insurance wanted things to come out of the safes and put away, and you can't decorate and put jewelry in every day, every night. I mean, you have special mounts and so on. So he devised these safes so you just close and that's it. And then the insurance is happy. And out of that, these safes, weighing tons, they traveled around all these exhibitions that were happening. And these were so difficult because we had every safe you can see had a different shape and size. So that was up to me to find the right jewelry for the right shape and size of the safe, and then position the safes telling the story of chronology. Now, we had loans from various museums, private collectors, the British aristocracy, and contemporary jewelers. So that was the chronology showing you pearls through the centuries. Here we have some examples from the British Museum of Roman, where pearls were status symbols. Here we have religious jewelry of the medieval period, where it was more about purity and chastity. And then we had Charles I pearl earring that he wore. This is documented, well documented, when he was beheaded in 1649. That was a great, at that time, we weren't even allowed to say where the pearl was, but now it's official. And we had also from the Royal Collection, from Her Majesty, at the time, Her Majesty, the late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth. And this is a necklace that Princess Alexandra received from her Denmark, where she came from, for her wedding to the future King Edward VII. So we had these beautiful royal pieces. And then from the Jewelry Museum in Germany, this unusual Art Nouveau piece, exquisite, with the abalone shell. And then the next room was all about pearls as a symbol of status and authority. And here we had, Qatar has wonderful tiaras with these incredible pearls. And just a little anecdote, here you see a dress. Well, there's a story to that, which just tells you the life of a curator. When we were due to set up the exhibition, Qatar didn't send a beautiful Mughal coat embroidered with pearls. They said, no, we won't send that. So as a curator, similar to the brief before, you have to find something to replace it. So at the V&A, we have this wonderful dress that belonged to Her Majesty the Queen, Elizabeth II, and she wore that in 1957. And the joke of it, of course, that the pearls were not real. So I talked about sustainability when we had the press around. Here, there's some of the tiaras in more detail. That was Hannah Rothschild, who married the Earl of Rosebery. This was a sensational bit. In the press, it was described these pearls as big as walnuts. Here we have from the Austrian royal family a tiara. And then more from today, we were very lucky to get the necklace that belonged to Marilyn Monroe, which she had for a very short marriage to Joe DiMaggio, the basketball player. She didn't like jewelry. She only had costume jewelry. This was the only real piece of jewelry that she even had and would wear even after they separated. And then the Queen of Jewels, Elizabeth Taylor, she wore her jewels in her films like many other actresses. And the Bulgari in Rome made these earrings, and we had that in the exhibition. And famous pearls, we had a whole showcase of very famous pearls. I still don't know who they belong to, but we were very lucky through Christie's to get out of vaults all kinds of fantastic pearls. And then the story of cultured pearls, for those who do not know, by the 1893, suddenly Mikimoto in Japan develops how you can make lots of pearls. You and I wouldn't be wearing a lot of pearls if it hadn't been for him and his invention of how to make cultured pearls, which are natural, but they're helped by human hand. And here we had displays. Mikimoto is a famous company. And here we had a scarf with 5,000 pearls. And you have to imagine that every pearl had to match, and it's the highest quality, only the top 5% quality pearls that they use for their actual jewelry. And then we had other jewelers from Munich and London, very, very rare pearls, Melo pearls, horse conch pearls, and this Baroque pearl, this fantastic ballet dancer made out of a Baroque pearl. And then this was the idea of my crazy co-curator, but I say he had great ideas. Because China makes mass-produced freshwater pearls and really in mussels and plastic bottles and all sorts of things, as you went out of the exhibition, you were reminded of what's happening in China. And that was his idea, the mirror at the back. I mean, we had 4, 8, 12 buckets. There was a level in between, but we had every bucket had pearls in, but through the mirror you thought it's ad infinitum pearls of mass production, which they were mass produced. And as a curator, you also have to be. I was living in London for a whole month when we were setting up the exhibition because everything that was positioned had to be corrected or signed off by me. And I remember shoving those pearls into the buckets. So yeah, and then I was asked to do a speech for the person opening, which happened to be Boris Johnson. I said, what a waste of time. He's not going to even read one word that I write. Of course he didn't. He talked about Oyster cards. So there you go. Now, the most important part of my life is the Alice and Louis Koch collection, which is now in the Swiss National Museum. I met the family in 1984, and I've worked for the collection is very rare because it goes back 4 generations, and I worked with 2 generations. And the collection of 2,500 rings now was started in Frankfurt, and around 1904, 1909, there were already 1,700 rings put together by a very famous court jeweler, Koch. And these boxes were made around 1909 or 1904, and that's when I started working on this collection. All handmade stands for each individual ring, mirrors, oak boxes, curved glass, which in those days was quite exceptional. And so 50 boxes. And I wrote these 2 big volumes with nearly 2,000 rings. And this book later, because I helped the 4th generation build a whole collection of 20th and 21st century rings. And they were really, yes, I was very lucky because it was lovely to be able Barbara is in the audience. Here, look who's here, Peter Chang. Her late husband's made that ring. In fact, we commissioned that ring because he hadn't made rings of that before then. And so there, what a nice coincidence. And I had a free hand in helping them buy 610 rings. That was a real honor. And we used to tease each other and so on. Can you wear the ring? I said, of course you can wear it. And so when I was working on the books, it was in a different area. And then it moved to which I did the whole move into a vault that was 4 stories down underground and in 2 rooms. So we had the 50 boxes here, and then I did this display of the contemporary rings in this vault. And then it moved to the Swiss National Museum. Thankfully, it moved to the Swiss National Museum. It's a good home. And the first display were 300 rings. So there I was, another move, another display. So my life really depended on that. And then came the big crescendo, this beautiful showcase with 1,700 rings. And I'll explain to you how we put that together. That was probably the most difficult display to do that I'd ever done. Here's the ring-shaped showcase. You have to advise the people that you have it looks as if the rings are straight. It all had to be computer calculated because you have to have a diagonal here, a surface, so that the light falls on it. We have that also in the V&A. There's certain things that you have to learn because lighting of jewelry is crucial to the display. These are all things you as a curator have to also help with. So how did I work on that? Well, 1,700 rings in a circle. And so we started off with themes in jewelry, introducing why you wear rings. Then we had a chronological area and then 20th century artist jewelers by countries. Now, the difficulty here is that I had to have all the rings in my head because if you get to, let's say, the next area and you've made a mistake, you can't go back. You have to continue because otherwise you have to change all these thousands of rings, especially when you get to the later part of it. It was exceedingly difficult. And in the contemporary part, we've got two that are in the wrong country, but that there was no going back. So everything you had to calculate exactly, and we had the grid and so on. So rather complicated. And the contemporary rings, because they have all different shapes, sizes, we had these templates, and the distances had to be calculated differently. And this was all computer generated to get the lines straight here. And just a few examples, curating without objects, you can't. So it goes back to ancient Egypt, goddesses of love and fertility, the snake against the evil eye. Sandals had an erotic significance in the Renaissance. Ruby and diamond rings we know today. That is very much about love, and the dog, symbol of loyalty. And here you have the vows of whom God has joined, let no man put asunder. And this I thought I'd throw in because this Wedgwood porcelain, this is a cameo of George III, and this is a unique ring. You can't find that. It's because there's an inscription below, and it was given, the ring was given by Josiah Wedgwood personally to his sculptor and designer, John Flaxman. So this is a unique piece. These are also unique pieces. This ring has the hair of the royal family of France before they were guillotined and locked up. Their physician managed to get the hair of them, and that was given. And this ring was made a bit later in 1820 with the hair of the whole royal family, King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, and his successor Louis XVII was only a child. And this is a papal ring, belonged to the Pope Pius IX. When they become popes, they get the so-called fisherman's ring, and when they die, it's broken. But somehow this family got it it got into the collection. Some family member must have sold it. And then we get into the contemporary part with Lalique and modernism in France in the 20s and 30s. In America, modernism, 40s, very rare rings, you can't get them. Now it's what I call the area that was 610. A ring is no longer a circular hoop. These are all rings in different shapes. Beautiful Italian gold work. And a British group I thought I'd show you. These were famous jewelers in London in the 50s and 60s. Grima and George Weil and lots. And I thought this was a bit amusing. I chose a few United Kingdom. This is when acrylic and gold was quite revolutionary to use, and you have the ring inside, and this part you wear as a brooch. So there you are. And how do you make a ring out of a book? The collector is and was a very heavy smoker, and I cheekily chose from this artist a history of smoking. That was my tongue-in-cheek thing. But it's cut out the paper, and then the artist makes these beautiful rings out of the recycled paper. And then you had a time where you had an artwork, and you took the ring out and wore the ring. This is Germany, acrylic and gold. The Japanese have fantastic gold work. And then we come to the last one, I'm still okay with time, is the Gobelin Gem Museum. Now, this was a completely different thing for me because I was asked during this was April, in March was the COVID pandemic, and in April I had a phone call from Switzerland. Would you design the Gobelin Gem Museum? And I thought, well, pandemic and so on, interesting job. But I said I can't travel with this whole COVID. Yeah, well, so anyways, I didn't. They were doing the a lot in the architectural part, and so I said, well, give me the ground plan and let me think what we do. So this is the entrance. So as a curator, you have to think, what does the visitor want to know? He comes in here. We have some nice things here, sort of quotes from a famous gemologist, and you walk through here. And I said, here you have to have something about the family, because the Gobelin family, there's 6 generations. They're still very active, and there were 6 generations going back to 1854. So you must, what you said, you have to introduce the Gobelins, otherwise you don't know why is it the Gobelin family. Then I said, when you come here, you need to tell what they do. They started as watchmakers, then they started making jewelry. I said, this story has to be here. And then, yeah, here we want a treasury. I said, that's fine. As long as you tell the story of the family, you tell what the family made over this 100 and odd years. And here we have the treasury room. This was the most difficult room to conceive, but we'll see. I'll show you what we've come up with. And then here they had a needed area because they do teaching, the Gem Academy. And then there were showcases should go here for changing exhibitions. And this is the place where the visitors can do. So I conceived that in 2020, but it took about 2 years or a year and a half until they actually got down to it. And it stayed pretty much my concept. So you walk in here, and here you have this big panel, and the red, I'll show you in a minute what that is. So you've got the iPads here, and you press on the iPad on the picture that you see, they move, the pictures move, and you press the iPad and it tells you a little bit of the story. This is 1854, and this is the 1920s, and so on, all 6 generations. And then you come to this part, which I said is absolutely important to show. So here we're going from watchmakers to jewelry, which was on 1854 watchmaking, 1920s jewelry. So there you have to, what do we do? So I said, well, this is what I have. My idea is what you can do in these sections, in these 9 sections. So here in the first section, you have the hourglass, which is their motto. Then you have pocket watches and wrist watches, and so on. So that you have to think. And then how do we do it? This is the final display. And my colleague, who I said, could you get out of the archive all the jewelry? Because I never traveled. I did this all by remote control. And so via Zoom and telephone and WhatsApp and whatever, I said to my colleague, just put it on a piece of paper like I've done all the other ones, just a simple piece of paper laid out, and let's see what you put and how you put it and position it, the chronology, and it has to be chronology as well as aesthetics. That's different parts of it. So here we had some lovely pocket watches and incredible wrist watches, men's watch, 1971, diamonds, white gold, ladies' watches, which came much later. Wristwatches came after the First World War, really. And then you have the next area is transition to jewelry, early jewelry designers, avant-garde, and focus on gemstones, because Gobelin is known for their gemstones. And then I said, put little plaques, use ruby as their motto, one of their mottos, ruby, and here put a ruby shape, a plaque, and what you're looking at. I was the only curator in the whole team. Everybody else was from the company and press, and we had designers and so on. But I was the only curator. I had to do very basic things. I said, don't put a drawer next to the opening, otherwise I had to play health and safety hazards, explain to them how you do that. So here are a few little pieces from that beautiful jewelry, this early watch. You turned it over and you could see it while you were wearing it. Beautiful 1940s jewelry. and the avant-garde designs and gemstones. But as a curator, you also have to be flexible. We were then told that the stones here were not good for conservation reasons, so we reduced it down to 2 necklaces, which in the end worked out very well. And then we had on the iPads drawings and press work, posters and information, deep, what we call the deep dive. And then came the pioneering moments. A very famous designer, Marta Widmer. They had an incredibly important watches, and the 2 pioneers of the family, one for gemology and the other one for watchmaking. Here we are, Marta Widmer, won many awards. And here's some of her wonderful creations, which we then show in the iPad, the drawing and the press. And then we show how these watches, incredible workmanship with some of the watches and the pioneers. And here, these gems. So you walk through, you come from what you see here in a minute. You walk through this doorway, and this is that red thing that's flashing in there. It's the size of a human being, two sides of it. And what you're looking at is microphotography of a ruby. And this is when you look under a microscope, under microphotography, you see there's a whole inner world in the gemstone. And this is blown up to human proportions. And that's what you see. And the idea was, and that was one of my ideas, but it wasn't that at that time, is when you come from the entrance, the visitor has to be pulled into that treasury room by something sensational when they look through the door opening. And that's what we had. And then we had the whole story of gemology, a very famous Eduard Joseph Gubelin, how he traveled. In those days, it was quite amazing, his travel instruments. The old gemological tools that you use to examine stones and microphotography. He built a lot of these machines himself, and the microphotography that you saw, that ruby, came from him. These are these ruby-shaped plaques. And then, of course, the highlight is this. Fortunately, I didn't have to choose the stones. We have 174 gemstones in there out of a collection of 28,000. And here you have numbers, and you press on the number, and then you get the whole information, which I'll show you in a minute. And this is for children that can look through the microscope, or grown-ups. It's fake, of course, but you can see what looking through a microscope is like looking onto a gemstone. And here you see you have the numbers, and here the information that comes up. And here on that left-hand side, we had the instruments on the right, and on the left, we had a hologram, which here we explain how a jewel comes from the mines, where the stones come from, how they're designed, where they're made. And because the jewelry belongs to a famous person whom nobody knows who it is, we had a hologram here. And here are the iPads, and the iPads had 3 levels, so 3 levels of information. And here you see a little bit of a display here. And here, this is again the microphotography, and it evokes the sort of dunes in the sand, and that's where this design comes from. So this is specific for Gubelin. They look into the life of the main stone and design according to the inspiration that the inner life of the stone creates. And that display you saw on the side of it here, that's a film showing you this volcano in Iceland. And it tells you that, of course, gemstones, out of these events, these gemstones appear out of the deep depths of the earth. And here we have 4 big chunks of stone from different countries. And then we have at the end, this is the display, 3 display cabinets. This was the idea of changing exhibitions. And this is the academies behind you here. And this is where the visitor can rest, and they can look at a video, and it shows you how the dinosaurs came up in life, and how when gemstones came and where the mines are. And this is a library, and here you can sit down, and the windows lead you onto Lake Lucerne, beautiful view. And then we conceived also what to put in the window frames, some sort of big stones or whatever. And I worked on this project from 2020 to 2023. and I'd never met my team, only on Zoom. And finally, last year, I managed to get to Lucerne, and here we met, and it was very strange. It was as if we'd been together all the time. I only knew the press, Patrick, from the press before. The others I'd never met before in person, and it was as if we'd going out for dinner somewhere. We'd known each other since ages. So that's the end of this is a little insight into curation. Thank you. Oh, should I stop sharing, Jane?
Yes, please, Beatriz. Thank
There
you.
we are.
If anybody
That's
any questions?
absolutely amazing, Beatrice. I think I mean where you brought it all together at the end and showed us the inner world of gemstones. I mean, I think you've opened up a little bit of your inner world that I think we could never have imagined. And I mean, there is so much that you bring to every single thing you do. Uh, I can't admire you enough. I'm sure there's lots of questions around, and I just want to throw out one which I heard said in one of your earlier pieces that I was looking at uh, over the weekend, and that was that there's a huge shortage of curators worldwide. And looking at the range and different skills that you've had to bring to your craft.
Well, you have to learn it. I mean, we all have a beginning. I mean, I was very fortunate. I mentored for the Art Fund a young curator in Edinburgh. And for me, Barbara knows her, I won't say names. And for me, it was a wonderful experience. She has blossomed into something fantastic. I just gave her the spark, and wow. So, they all learn. And she was lucky that she got a curator's award, which was certainly very good. And I was fortunate to mentor her. But I know others, we all start at the beginning and we all learn through experience. It's not something that comes in 5 minutes.
That's
And you make
very clear.
mistakes on the way, as we all do. We're not infallible.
Yeah. Other questions, please. Yeah, Pat. You need to unmute yourself, Pat. Jane. Yeah.
Can I ask, Beatrice, you're wearing two earrings and a brooch that look very modern. What is they made from?
It's 3D printed resin.
All right.
And Barbara, it comes from Glasgow. It's a jeweler called Eva Balashova. What I wear is very often to do with, well, the dress I wear, I try to coordinate it if I can. And I was a bit hesitant, but the colors do crop up in the dress.
Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question here from Kath, Beatrice.
Yeah.
Do you ever get overwhelmed by the beauty and history of the items that you're working on?
Well, I wouldn't say overwhelmed. It's something you work with, and of course you are overwhelmed if you think Catherine the Great was wearing it or things like that. That may think, oh gosh, yes, or something that a famous person wore. That may it sort of brings to life that because the problem is with jewelry, you don't know who wore it and why they wore it. You're very often just guessing. So you get overwhelmed when I get overwhelmed by good design, obviously, that as well. Yes, I mean quality, beauty, but beauty has nothing to do with materials that are used. It's good design, and I mean it was interesting building up this collection. That is something that is overwhelming to be able to build a collection together with a collector. That is something really special. You have that once in a lifetime and never again.
How many, what's the proportion, do you think, with curating male and female?
Ah, well, all I can say, when we had the V&A jewelry gallery, there were 7 maternity leaves, and I and my co-curator, the senior curator, we were the two were holding the fort the whole time. So maybe that might answer the question. It's quite a lot of women. Yes, 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 yes.
What's the normal qualification? You went the art history route? Is that quite a normal route into the?
Well, I really can't answer that, because I'll tell you why. Because in Germany, when you study something, you continue in that field. That is what you learned. Whereas in England, you could have, gone to university doing English literature and suddenly you're doing art. So I can't really answer that, because the British system is very different to the system that I came from. By the way, I did study 1 year in England. I was in Norwich for a year, but I then returned to Germany. But in Germany, when you do art history, and I did classical archaeology, thank goodness, because it was important for what I did later, the collections with all the archaeological material. But it's a completely different system. So for me, that's what I learned. That's what I started. In England, it's very, very different. Very different.
Thank you. There's a question here from Christine asking, have you curated your father's creations, or have you plans to do so?
Well, I don't have very much of his pieces. In actual fact, shouldn't be even saying it, but the charms and that bracelet, which belongs to me, and those, I put it away so safely, I can't find it since about 3 years. So yeah, so it's no, there's no curating there, no curating for that. It's only a few pieces, which of course I cherish. And I saw from Van Cleef, he sold to Van Cleef and his designs. He also sold pieces at Bergman and Gutdorf. And but I saw recently from Van Cleef a design for a brooch or whatever it was, and I recognized that really goes back to what my father designed. But you have that's forget about it. That's me interested in it. That's about it.
Helen has asked, you mentioned at the beginning that jewelry was very important in Cuba. Why was that?
Well, here in England, you buy a house together, you put your house together. But in southern countries and so on, jewelry was much more important. You married and you had good jewelry, good old southern. It's a different mentality, The wife had good jewelry. It wasn't about, house things. It's a different mentality. It was a completely different mentality. And in actual fact, in our family, my father had the best jewelry, by the way. He had really the best.
Tricia, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, yes, can do. Can you hear me?
Yes, I says.
Oh, good, yes. I was going to ask you, Beatriz, are there areas of jewellery which you still wish to explore, or do you think you've covered enough now and you're on into depth?
I think I've covered. I think, well, there's always, you never cease to learn, and there's always more and more to learn. But when I do the V&A jewelry history courses, I bore them terribly, because I start with 150,000 BC with eagle claws. Which is very important to think about. Why do we wear jewelry? And in my personal feeling is that it's jewelry started in being protective and amulets, but then becoming decorative and status. So I'm fascinated in going back quite a while longer. I jump quite quickly afterwards. I don't bore them forever. But it's interesting to know, why do you wear jewelry? Because today we think of jewelry as being decorative. It's adornment. It's you don't think the jewelry had functions apart from being adornment and status was hugely important, and amuletic is hugely important. Love, expressions of love. Medicine, there are jewels that were medical. You don't realize. In fact, I'm giving a lecture. That's the next one I have to prepare for the V&A. It's a taster lecture, and I decided to do one on, it's sold out, so don't try and get them. I decided to do a talk only what isn't, it's not adornment, there's a function behind jewelry.
Extremely interesting. Jane, is that all of the questions now?
There's a couple. Do you have a favorite gem and why? Favorite gemstone?
Well, the person who asked that, they're not by any chance the press, are they?
No.
Because when you do these press conferences and so on, the first question you get is, what is your favorite jewel? And I always tease them. I say, and you can't. I mean, if you worked on such a wide range of jewelry, you
Well,
can't.
it has to be Ruby because that's the name of your lovely little doggy. So there you go.
No, that is a different reason. That's a different Ruby. It isn't Ruby, by all means. She was called Rodney, and I had to find a name that was similar to Rodney from sound.
Oh.
And because I got her when I was losing Raymond, I decided, okay, Ruby, but not because of it's a gemstone, but it's the stone of love and life.
Oh.
So that's why. No, I really don't have a favorite. But I always, when I have the press and such the press situations, I say, I know which is my favorite, but I won't tell you. I tease them.
And there is a question: how difficult is it to prepare and present the V&A courses? And I know you put a huge amount of work in whenever you're working on one of those, and we try and contact you for something. You go, "Oh, I'm absolutely."
Yeah, it is complicated because my style of course, because there are speakers who will show you maybe for a whole hour 5 or 6 pieces, and they will talk and talk and talk and talk about those pieces. That's not my style. My style is there are a lot of images, which is a lot of work. But for me, the image has to what I say has to be underlined by the image. And then so it's my style. It's stupid. If I had less pieces, it'd be less work. But there you go.
We appreciate it enormously, and it's my job to do the vote of thanks this evening, Beatrice. I think we've all learned an awful lot this evening.
And guess who's left me? She said, I've heard it all before. Ruby's gone. Sorry to interrupt you.
Right. There's so much skill involved in curating, not least of which is the storytelling, which is really important. You know, I work with communications, and telling stories is how you get things across to people, and you know, curating the exhibitions that you have, and curating the books that you put together with all those pieces that you hold in your head, so that you can tell the story in a way that people can process it and appreciate it. And you curated your story for this evening for us, for which we're very grateful. So thank you so much. It's a fantastic skill. If anybody here doesn't know already, Beatrice and her family were refugees 5 times over the 100-year period. So she's asked that if anybody wants to make any donations, having listened this evening, to donate to Hearts Welcomes Refugees, which is a charity that our club supports, and that one of our members, Pamela, is involved with, working to support the refugees as well. So I'll put the well, we've actually on our website, the club's website, we have a donate button, which you can go to get our bank details to do a transfer. So I'll put that in the chat.
And I'd like to express thanks to those who have already donated or will be donating. Thank you.
Well, we're the lucky ones, Beatrice. So thank you.
Welcome.
We're deeply grateful to you, Beatrice, both for your time and and all the time you spend with us. And I think everybody will support me in saying that we will enjoy going to look at some of the work that you've done in situ in the V&A, hopefully in the not too distant future. I hate to say I've never been in the jewellery gallery, and I suspect
Well, it's better you
all of
go
them
now.